So my name is Karsten Deppert, and I'm going to talk about starting a business during a crisis. And you see my presentation, and there's my contact info as well. So if you have any questions or so, just ask me afterwards, if you have the possibility during this event. And as I said before, you're free to ask questions. Either raise your hands, and I hopefully see it, or write in the chat. I have the chat open. So just right there, and I'll see it and read it out loud and answer it if I can answer it. But okay, so background. This is a little bit of my own background. So I'm currently working with Venture Lab one day a week, but apart from that, I'm running a couple of businesses which I'm involved in. And my first real business, which I started, was a company which is now called Contento, which was called something else in the beginning in Swedish. And that was actually started in 2008. And for those who are observant of history, 2008, 2009 weren't really the brightest of years for starting or for the economy in general. And the idea was a little bit like talking about that. Okay, how was it to start something back then? What advantages of starting maybe a business now? And how does it work? But to understand a little bit, I thought I would talk you through the first couple of companies which I started, just to give you an impression. I've started multiple companies, and I'm still involved in all of them in some way. That's a little bit weird, and it works for me. I wouldn't recommend it for everybody, so don't take my way of doing things as the right way of doing things. It's just one way of doing things. There's definitely other ways which might be better. But the first company which became a real company was Contento. And we started out with just actually writing content for a website. And this was started by me and a friend. And the friend had a couple of websites and domains back in 2005, 2006, when everything with the internet was still fairly new. And he just had this problem that he could technically actually start a lot of websites, but for the websites to actually make any use, they needed content. There needed to be something on the websites. And that was kind of where the idea was born. So this was actually started while still studying at the end of our studies, and started with me writing content for the websites. And then we hired other students to write content. And it still actually works pretty similar to that. Nowadays, we work with a lot of different languages. So we do content in, I think, 25 different languages or so. And it's a lot more organized now. And it's more, it's an organization in that sense that it wasn't in the beginning, of course, because in the beginning it's only a couple of people. It's very easy to do things. Once you become hundreds of people, you need systems and organizations, stuff like that. So it's, of course, much more organized now. But in essence, it's still very similar. And we have lots more advanced tools now, but it's still at its core very similar in that sense. And still a lot of students working for the company, but not only students. There's also like digital nomads or people who want to live in the countryside and don't need so much money, who work for that, have this extra job or something like that. So it's really, it's very nice actually to get to know writers over the years and hear their stories. There's a lot of people who have personal choices who work for the company, which is it's very heartwarming to actually hear. That was the first company which I started, and that was 2008, 2009. We'll get a little bit back to that, I think. The second one is Mindpark. Mindpark is nowadays a bunch of co-working spaces. And also very early, also co-working didn't really exist back then. So this was kind of like, it existed in the ways that they were, of course, some co-working places, but nobody actually used the word co-working, for example. And when I didn't start Mindpark, I took over Mindpark. And when I took it over in 2009, back then, I mean, it was like, there were like two places like this in Skåne and in general, just so that's really, really different now to how it was back then. And it's also interesting with that kind of environment. Is of course makes you surrounded by a lot of interesting people, so it's awesome in a lot of ways, of course. Third company I founded, and I started companies in the beginning, like one each year, more or less. It wasn't planned like this; it just happened like this. So the third company was something back then called Student Network. Now they call it the Campus Webbureau, which started out as kind of getting students extra jobs. That was kind of the basic idea, because also I had still recently graduated. I still knew a lot of students, and I knew that a lot of students didn't have any fun jobs besides studying. And so I wanted them to have more interesting jobs. So we actually started with kind of like the initial idea was actually to have them as personal assistants to managers or something like that. Like, okay, once a week you're working with a manager somewhere and helping that manager out to do things. Because it's a really good experience as a student to learn all of those things. And yeah, we start out like that. Of course, as with everything within business, how we start out and what it becomes is not the same. So like, yeah, it was a good idea, but it didn't work in practical terms, because it turns out that our customers, we thought our customers should be like managers, like either CEOs or middle management or something like that, who had too much to do in too little time. And that assumption was right, but the problem was that they had too little time to do anything about it. They had too little time. So like, it didn't help. Yes, they had the need, but they didn't want our solution because it took too much time for them to get the solution up and running. So we had like a couple of students having those kind of positions, but it was a lot of hassle to get it started. And whenever it for some reason didn't work out, the student graduated and moved away, for example, and then like getting them restarted was really hard. So after a while we changed, and we were focused more on actually doing digital things for companies, more project-oriented, project-based. Because we realized that's how the companies work, that's what they can accept, and for the student it worked as well. So nowadays, doing mostly digital projects for companies, mostly smaller companies. So it's an interesting niche, but yeah, also, so that was started 2010. And then we rescued Fruit, which also started back then. It actually first became a company a little bit later, but it started as a project. And Rescued Fruit was started at a creative workshop, which we did at Mindbug actually a long time ago, where kind of the idea was born that all this food waste, which especially in Helsingborg, where I'm based, there's all the food for the Nordics is imported. So here we have all the warehouses which store all the foods, because they are then later transported to the rest of Sweden. And kind of those warehouses, they have a lot of waste. Not a lot in like percentage-wise. Like percentage-wise, they have like 0.5% of their fruit is waste, so it's kind of efficient. But when you import 100 tons of fruit a day, 0.5% is 500 kilos of fruit a day, which is thrown away. So yeah, it's kind of a lot of fruit, even though it's an efficient operation. So that's kind of how Rescue was started, and how we got that going. So nowadays we started out with doing marmalade. We've skipped that now. Now we do mostly juices, but also ice cream and some other things. So yeah, it's a very interesting and special business. So these were just to give you an idea, these were the four first companies which I was involved in, and started a little bit over like 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, 12-ish. And I will get back to that and why that is relevant as well. Okay. Let's see. So, starting during a crisis, what are the benefits? So, like one's initial response might be like, okay, starting during a crisis must be really bad, but that's actually not true. Starting during a crisis is actually very good in a lot of ways. It's not perfect, but it's definitely not so bad. Why? Because what is a crisis? It doesn't matter if it's as now Corona, a crisis from a virus, from the environment, from an external point of view, or if it's an internal crisis like it was 2008, 2009, 2010, where it was first the mortgage crisis in the US, which then spilled over and became the euro crisis in the EU, and which were more like internal malfunctions. But so it doesn't matter where the crisis comes from, but all crises to accelerate change. That's what they do. Like, because suddenly, if you are a big company or if you're an organization and you're on your way to do some kind of change, you will always have people who don't agree. You'll always have stakeholders who don't agree. It might be employees, it might be board members, it might be customers, doesn't matter. You always have people who say, do we really need to do this? Is this really the right way of doing it? Shouldn't we do it like this instead? And when there's a crisis, you have an excuse. And the excuse is that you can suddenly say, yeah, we know it's not perfect, but now we need to do this. So we do it anyway, even if people don't agree. And this makes a crisis an accelerator. A lot of decisions, which usually would have taken years, can suddenly be done in weeks or months. So that's an effect which all crises have. And this makes it so that the environment, like the business environment or society, changes relatively a lot in a very short amount of time. And I mean, you would of course think that it doesn't change so much. No, it doesn't change so much. It's not. We will not live in a totally different society after Corona. It will be 95% the same, but 5% difference is a huge difference in the society. So even if it's mostly the same, it's still different enough to actually be a difference. Because businesses don't operate on a 90% efficiency. Businesses operate on a 99% efficiency. So anything like lower than 99% is really not good. It's hard. It's hard decisions which need to be made. So what's the point of saying these things? That is what happens during a crisis is that all businesses are in a way thinking, okay, how do we adjust? How can we adjust? What do we need to do to adjust? And they don't always have the best information. So they will do a lot of adjusting, which thus turns out isn't the best done. And this makes it so that because things change, even if only 5% change, it actually gives a lot of space for new businesses because people will not change in the right way because they don't really know what the right way is. So starting up a business during these times actually makes you able to see those opportunities and don't have any legacy in that sense. So this is the real benefit of starting during a crisis. You don't have any organization which doesn't agree with you. You don't have any stakeholders who are saying this is really the right way. And you don't have any customers who complain, but our product it doesn't work anymore. We wanted what you had before. All those kind of things. You don't have it. And these things really hold existing organizations back a lot. It would be really easy to, as an outsider, it can be really easy to think like, why don't they just do this instead? But you can't. An organization cannot change quickly because an organization is always multiple people, multiple stakeholders, and they need to communicate. And that communication takes time. Even a really efficient organization, it takes time to get everybody agreed, everybody aligned in the new way. And that makes it so that quick change is not possible for an existing organization. A new organization, quick change isn't even an option. Like everything is quick. Like there isn't even any change because there was nothing before. So no legacy is a super important part, and it's really easy to underestimate your like competitors or other older existing companies. It's really easy to think like, but they can super simply just do the same thing. No, they can't. Like expect organizations to be slow to change. So starting is good in that sense. The other thing which is good of starting during a crisis is that every other organization, which is an existing organization, is busy. They're busy discussing like what to do now. How do we do this the best way? And they're busy exploring different paths, like what if we launch this kind of product? What if we change to this? And all these kind of things. So they're super busy with just trying to figure out their new place in the economy. And that's something which takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of mental capacity from the organizations, from the leaders, from the people working there, etc. So and that makes it so that they can take a long time to find the right way of doing things. And then the third thing is that what happens also is that if you're part of an existing organization, you want things to go back to as it was before. Like how it was before, that's nice. We knew what the customers wanted. We knew what to produce or what kind of service to give them. And we knew our customer acquisition channels, all of those kind of things. Like, So the entire organization actually longs to going backwards. Everybody longs, even if they don't say it, to thinking like why isn't it just as before? And this affects their forward thinking, because what happens is that they also think like, okay, like you have a lot of wishful thinking. So you easily think like, okay, yeah, now this happens, okay, but then it will be as it was before. So they're really bad at seeing opportunities because everybody is wanting to see the ways things were done before. And you as an outsider, you're the ones being able to see the new opportunities, to be able to see like, yeah, but this is totally changed. This will be different now. People will not order in the same way, or people will order more in this way instead of that way, and things like that. But an existing organization does want it to be as before, so they will also not overly commit to the new ways of doing things. Because it's just a little bit against our nature. We like certainty, we like comfort, and those kind of things. So those are all benefits of starting afresh. That you don't have the legacy, you're not busy adopting old things or your old organization to new things, and you're not stuck in wishful thinking about how it should be or how it will be again, because you don't have that wishful thinking. Okay. And as I said, you're free to ask questions in the comments, especially. Okay, worst timing. Worst timing is actually starting shortly before a crisis. That's actually the worst timing. Why that? Because you get the negative effects of having existing business model, and you have an organization, you have your stakeholders, and all those kind of things. So you have all the things which makes it hard to change, but you don't have any cash. You don't have enough revenue from previous years to get you through a tough period of time, or you don't have enough external funding or stuff like that. So starting shortly before a crisis is actually that's probably one of the toughest things to do. So what do you do in those cases? I would say you need to kind of rethink your business. That's the best thing to do. You cannot just try to let go and say, okay, if we started now, what would we have done in that case? Or if we restart now. And if you can do that, you have a really good opportunity because you have lessons learned from the last couple of years of your business, and you have new ways of doing things. And if you're fairly new started, you don't have a big organization, so you don't have so many stakeholders. So getting everybody aligned is still definitely possible to do. And so then you can actually have a really good position. But it requires a lot of mental energy, because if you've been busy, if you've done your startup for like 1 or 2 years, and like you have spent so much mental energy already on things, so like it's tough to do because this requires new mental energy from you. You need to rethink. You need to actually sit down, like, okay, what do we do? How do we do it? And so it's definitely not easy. It's a very hard thing to do because the wishful thinking part comes really easily in here. It's really easy to think like, yeah, well, everything will just go back as normal in a couple of months. So then we're fine. So that's hard. So this is amongst the toughest things to be in this kind of position. Okay. With that, I'm going to do's and don'ts. I don't have super many slides. There's only a couple of slides left. I'm hoping for some interaction later. If you're planning on starting something now, you should definitely not start something which is Corona related. So you should not start a face mask printing company. That's a bad idea to start. Because it's the crisis an accelerator of changes which would have happened anyway. It just makes those changes happen quicker. It's not related to the crisis itself. The crisis is the accelerator. It's these big changes, which is a part of the relevance. What caused the crisis, how the crisis affects people, very, very, very short-term things. So if you start a business which is focused on solving something now during this crisis, then all you will do is be out of business in a couple of months when the crisis is over. So there's no real benefit of doing anything like that. So I would not start anything which is kind of Corona related. Like I would not start a business which is about making it easier to commute without spreading disease. like people will go back to a more normal way of commuting in the future. They will not be afraid of diseases in the same way as we were afraid of that for 2 years ago. So two specific things, don't do that. Instead, you should see the long-term things and what's accelerated now. That's what you should look at. And in the Corona's case, this can actually be confused because a lot of the long-term things are the digitalization of different things. And the digitalization is something which is also accelerated now. And the digitalization is also actually a solution to certain things within Corona. So here becomes a little bit confusing. But if you do something within the digitalization and its effect on society, then we say that's a good thing to do. And you should definitely do it within a field which grows. So going back to my own companies, Contento, our customers were mostly online businesses and e-commerce. We did not even know there was a crisis back in 2008. We read about it. We didn't feel it. We didn't see it. Why? We were a small business. We were in a field which was growing. So just each year we had more customers than the year before. If there wouldn't have been a crisis, maybe then we would have had even more customers, but we don't know. So if you're in a field which is expanding, a crisis only makes expansion less quick maybe, but it's still an expansion. There's still room for more opportunities. So try to find fields which are expanding. It's so much easier to do a business if your customer base is growing generally, because then you can do a lot more things. It's a lot more forgiving. It's a lot of you can actually share a lot more experience as well with other people because everybody is aware of that. Yeah, but we don't need to compete. We can actually just aim at making the pie bigger, at getting more customers on board. That's the most important thing for us. So that's a really interesting point from that perspective. It was the same with Mindpark. What's that? Co-working space didn't exist. Nowadays, a lot of co-working spaces exist. But the same there, it was an expanding area. There's more and more co-working. So having a business vision of field which is expanding is so much easier. The third company I started, which was with students and the digital marketing things. Now that never really took off. Why did it not take off? Because what we did wasn't solving any new problems. Because when we started out, we were just having students and trying to get them fun and meaningful extra jobs. That wasn't expanding. There's no expanding market in that. Then after a while, we realigned it to become more towards the digital and then it actually became more stable because suddenly we were like, okay, there's actually a market where people have a continuous need of things. But that business never really got going in a good way compared to all the others. And then we had Rescue Fruit. And Rescue Fruit is the same. It's not that the beverage market is expanding. That's not what it's actually expanding. It's getting more people, so it's expanding a little bit. But what's expanding is the environmental consciousness. Was the climate consciousness. So Rescue was really at the right timing from that perspective when we started. Okay, people want to consume more sustainable. They want to consume better from a climate perspective. That's a really good trend to be part of. So the trend might not be it can be a sub-segment. It's the same with co-working. The trend isn't that, there's a more need for office spaces. No, it's a trend within the office space area. But for example, with e-commerce, then it's also a trend in general. E-commerce is growing. So what the trend is can be a little bit hard to see sometimes, but make sure to find things which are in a market which is expanding, because that's where you will have the easiest time of succeeding. It's definitely possible to succeed in other areas as well, but it's just so much harder. So advice, do that. Okay. If I would start right now, this is of course only based on me. If I would start right now, I would actually start something within education. Why that? Because there's a trend right now towards education. And when I say education, I actually don't mean primary school. That trend is, of course, growing a bit because we become more and more people. So more and more people need to go to school, but it's not growing a lot. And university, that's growing, especially over the next couple of years, because we will now have a lot of unemployment. So governments will put more money into having more university spaces, or enabling more to go to university because it keeps them off from being unemployed. So that's something which will expand in that sense. But education actually grows a lot because the world is changing faster and faster. So the trend here is also the digitalization trend from the perspective, or kind of the complexity trend, like that we become more and more people, more and more businesses, and we can do more and more things. And what happens is that we understand that we cannot have the same knowledge and we cannot have the same job for eternity. We need to kind of change all the time. So in education, there will be a huge increase in demand, and it already has been so for the last probably 10, almost 20 years, I would say, in training for people who are working. Like you need to learn new skills. You need to learn new software. You need to learn new management theories, all those kind of things. So that's definitely a field I would look into, like doing something within education in one way or another. And of course, this can also be digitalized in one way or another, but it doesn't have to be. You definitely start a business which is about, I don't know, TikTok workshops for brands. Definitely a need for that because nobody really knows what that is on a business side, for example. So it can be physical, it can be like something which doesn't have to be digital, but starting it right now, digital is a bit easier. Starting it during summer, after summer, doesn't have to be digital, but if you wanted to scale sooner or later, it needs to be digital because it's quite hard to scale non-digital things. It's possible, but just very hard. So easier with digital things. Another thing I would actually start is something non-digital. And what I mean with non-digital is another trend. And the trend is that we are in a trend of digitalization. So more and more things become digital. However, because we're digitalizing more and more, there's also an increased need of being non-digital. And that's, for example, stillness or meditation retreats and yoga, all those kind of things. That's definitely a trend I would also check out because there'll be a huge increase in that kind of needs. And both of these, both education and the non-digital or the mental well-being area, are also things where we can actually draw a lot of learnings from the last month or 2 months because people have been isolated a lot more now. What does that tell us about being digital or non-digital from the mental point of view? Maybe people have learned new things during that time, which can actually be something we should have used later on, which can be packaged or which can be branded or done like transformed to an app or a website or just something which you can use. So that's, for example, there's a good amount of new information out there which can be packaged, I would say. And the same with education. People have tried a lot of new things with education the last month or 2 months. So there's definitely also a lot of learnings out there which you can use and actually move forward with. But as I said before, you always need to remember you cannot solve a specific corona problem because if you're solving a specific corona problem, it will be really hard for you after the summer when that problem is no longer as urgent. So you need to solve a bigger problem, but you can use learnings from corona. That's, of course, super good if you can do in one way or another. But you need to think that this will be needed in 3 years' time. If your business is not needed in 3 years' time, it's not a business. Then it's a temporary project, which might do a lot of good. So you should know, not saying you shouldn't do a temporary project, it's just that you should have the right ambitions, or not the right ambitions, you should have the right foresight so that you know what kind of project you're doing. Okay, I got a question here. Do you mean non-digital like a product or service which is taking place in the physical world but can still be marketed and sold digitally? Yeah. So when I say non-digital here, I don't mean it's like everything's digital nowadays, whether we want it or not. What I actually mean is the product itself. I actually don't mean non-digital. I actually mean mental. I actually mean like something for mental well-being. And I think we will see an increased need in having our mental well-being like exposed to the things which are digital, like going out into the forest. That will definitely be an increase in those kind of activities. But of course, they still need to be sold. They still need to be marketed, and that will be done digital because that's definitely the easiest way of doing it in one way or another. So that's what I mean. So it's a little bit vague how I wrote about it, but I want to talk about it. That's why I didn't write mental. Hope that answered your question. Okay. More or less the last slide. Important things which have changed now, because there's something to keep in mind as well. There's a lot of information and insights and lessons learned out there, and a lot of those just became obsolete. They would have been true otherwise, but now they become obsolete. And you need to realize that when you start a business, that you need to realize that you cannot trust information from pre-2020 in the same way. Doesn't mean that it's not true. It just means you cannot trust it. You must always take it with a grain of salt, and you must think, is this information still relevant? So one of the things which has changed a bit already, and will probably change more, is that it's a lot harder to get external funding for your company or startup. And the reason is that people like to, like you say venture capital, or you say like Swedish, you have the term riskkapital, and which means like risk money, risk capital. And the problem is that nobody likes to take risk. So even if venture capital is about taking risk because they want a high return, they actually don't want to take risk. So that means that if they are not sure how the future will be, they're really hard to convince to invest in something. And that raises the bar for everybody. So everybody will have a lot harder to raise money because you're only willing to invest in things where you can predict the future. And during a crisis, everything becomes more uncertain, things become accelerated, but you don't know how fast they were accelerated. Were they accelerated here or here or here? That affects a lot how the future will be. So a VC needs to do a lot of research and needs to kind of get used to the new environment first. And that takes years before that happens. And during those years, they will be a lot less inclined to invest in risky things. So that means that you will still be able to get funding, but then you need customers, or you need a proven track record of that you actually will succeed. It will be a lot harder demands put on you as an entrepreneur in order to get funding. So it's so much harder, I would say, than the rest of the year, or probably as well next year, to get funding. So I would advise against taking that road unless you have to. It's a lot better to start with customers. Now is the time to really focus on customer needs. What do people want? Because the customer needs have changed. So all other existing companies, which might be in your market, they don't really know what the customer wants. So now is the time to talk to customers. Ask them the hard questions to kind of figure out what do they actually want to buy. Build that product or that service or whatever it is you want to do, and then get customers on board. And when you have customers on board, you can get funding to scale. Like, okay, we've done this, we make money, now we want to hire more people. That kind of money will still be there. But getting that money just more based on an idea or on a concept, or you've talked to some people, they say they want this, doesn't cut it anymore. And you need to show them the action, that they have actually purchased it, that they actually have put their money where their mouth is. So that's an important difference now. And the same with other things. If you would go back 1 year, a lot of advice, for example, would be about hiring and how to do things like that. Hiring has totally changed. A year ago, everybody would tell you that one of the top focuses of a startup is to hire the right people and spend a lot of time on hiring. There's so much more talent out there now. There will be a lot more talent out there in the next couple of years. So hiring is still important, but it's not as critical from that point of view. And you will have a lot easier to find talent. So it's not as high up in your prioritization list, for example. So it's things like that. So everything pre-2020, take it with a grain of salt and ask yourself, is this still the important details or not? But customers, I would say it's always important, but now it's more important than ever.